So right now I'm here with Stephen Holman. He is a artist and animator and creator of Life with Loopy, a series of shorts from Nickelodeon and a vast amount of other animations as well. Stephen, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm very well.
My first question for you is, how did you get into animation?
Well, I never trained for it at all. I went to art school as a painter, as a fine artist, and I still paint now. So I ended up. I never intended to get into animation, even though I loved, especially. I grew up in England, and there's a whole tradition of stop motion animation for younger kids in England. So I loved that, all that stuff. There's shows like the Pogles and the Clangers and things that most American, maybe some Canadian audiences know about. But this was in the '60s that I grew up on. So anyway, I loved all that stuff, but I never thought I was going to get into it. And then what happened was I'd moved to Los Angeles in the late '80s, and I was showing my paintings in a gallery, and they were seen by the guys who were making Pee Wee's Playhouse, which was, I think they were shooting the last two seasons of Pee Wee's Playhouse in Los Angeles. That was a show, this was about 1989, I guess, and they liked my stuff and asked me to work on it as a designer of this new little. They wanted one little more animation short for the last two seasons, and I went for I actually didn't even know what the job was. I went for a job interview for it, and I got the job, and they said, "Well," I said, "What's the job?" And they said, "Well, it's Pee Wee's Playhouse. Do you want to do it?" And that was a totally, I was watching. It was a cult show back then, and I was totally aware of it already and loved it. So I was like, "This is great." So I worked on that for a while on this, and that was and I kind of learned the ropes as I was doing it. And a lot of Pee Wee is very mixed media, or was. Had live action, you had stop motion puppets, you had claymation, you had all sorts of stuff going on, and some great people working on it. And it was a hugely massive show at the time, big ratings and all of that. So I think what happened was I just got excited by the idea that as an artist, you could do stuff that was really artistic, but not just have a tiny audience in a local gallery. You could get on TV and have this massive audience. I mean, this was before internet, where you've got an even bigger audience. But TV seemed pretty darn exciting, and you could actually earn some money of it as well, which is always hard as an artist. So that got me into, after Pee Wee, I just carried on. Both, I kind of carried on as an artist, but I also carried on, I ended up starting my own animation company in the early '90s, and kept on going.
Very cool. How did you first adapt to like changing, well, not really changing, but learning animation quickly for the show?
Well, I wasn't when I was starting on Pee Wee. I was designing, so it was all like sort of stuff I kind of knew. It's just like doing the drawing, the artwork, basically, and the rest of it. Wow, how did I learn? I think it was I married my wife Josephine in 90. Well, we got together in 91, 92, and she was working. She was just coming out of art college and got a job on the Nightmare Before Christmas. So I was surrounded by this stuff, and I also ended up working on a stop motion series for ABC this was all up in San Francisco at the time. I was living up there, and this again is like so it was Pee Wee in LA in '89, but by '91, '92 I was up in San Francisco, and it was a golden age of animation up there. So I was just picking all of this stuff up on a daily basis, working with everyone, understanding how it worked. It does just osmosis, really, just absorbing it all until I knew what I was doing.
It's very cool. Any distinct things that you remember producing for the show?
For Pee Wee, well, yes, there was a little a thing called El Hombre, which all in Spanish. El Hombre meaning in Spanish meaning the man, I guess. And Paul Rubens, who was Pee Wee, had got this black velvet painting he'd found, I think, in a yard sale or something, of this kind of macho Spanish hero-looking guy, and brought it in and said, "I'd like to make a little animation short out of that looks like this." So the whole task was to make an animation that was only just a few seconds long. Those things weren't very long. That looked like a black velvet painting come to life. And so that's what I did. That was my Pee-wee contribution, is kind of did all the artwork for that. And I worked with an animator on that called Joe Horn, who was really worked on Beastie Boy videos and stuff too. I worked on a Beastie Boy video as well around that time. There was a lot of crossover between. It was the era of MTV and wild great videos for MTV, and TV was pretty innovative, animation was pretty innovative. You could actually be commercial and experimental at the same time in those days, which was great. I loved it.
That's very interesting. What did you work on after you were done with Pee-wee?
I worked on there was a producer named Prudence Fenton who produced all the animation on Pee-wee. And she went on to be the producer on a thing called Liquid Television for MTV. So because of my connection with her, I was invited to create something myself for Liquid Television. That was my next project. Liquid Television was another amazing. I don't know if you're aware of that one. That ran for a few years on. Yeah, that was a great show too. That's where Beavis and Butthead came from, and Eon Flux and all sorts of good stuff. So I created a pretty insane little series of shorts called Joe Normal for that. And it was, again, I love combining things. So it was a combination of pixelated live action, stop motion animation, live puppetry, all jammed together in these weird little crazy shorts.
Wow. How many did you produce for the show?
For that, it was just three of them. But they were nuts. We had I don't know if you've heard, they're crazy. They're crazy. There's someone gets his leg bitten and there's blood spouting out, live action blood and crazy stuff.
Now, at least compared to this one of your more lighthearted projects, but a very good show nonetheless, was Life with Loopy. And that was a part of the anthology series Kablam, one of my favorite shows. How did that get started?
That was, it was part of the 90s. It was a really great decade for especially Nickelodeon, but like I was saying, and animation on television in general was pretty, they wanted stuff that had a really unique look to it, which if you're an artist is a wonderful challenge. You wanted to create something new and different and something that didn't look like anything else. So how it happened was I was at that point, after Joe Normal, I think that's pretty much where I started my own little company. And I pitched a show called We Are the Shrimpskins to Nickelodeon, which we developed for a year or two with Nickelodeon, and ended up, we had to have a sort of a contract deal with them to do that. And they threw in a little kind of stipulation that we, just to make the contract, what it is, lawyers do this stuff. They wanted an extra little animated short to go with it as part of the deal. And just to get more for their money kind of thing. And what happened was the Shrimpskin show never really, we ended up making one little tiny special of it. But the little extra thing that was in the contract, that's what turned into Life with Loopy.
Hi, I'm Larry. This is my little sister. Her name's Lupicia, but we call her Loopy. She's 7 years old, and I'm 12. But I'm here to tell you about Loopy. Now, I tell you, Loopy gets some crazy ideas in her head sometimes.
So suddenly, I started working on that and developing that. And then Kablam came along and Nickelodeon realized it was the perfect place to put it. So I met the Kablam guys who were responsible for Henry and June and, putting the whole thing together. And, that was it. It was Loopy started up and that ran for 4 years of my life, which was, and I loved Loopy was fantastic. It was, we made it up in San Francisco, which was, I was working with animators who were all, amazing talent pool up there because all the Henry Selick movies were being made up there at the same time, James and the Giant Peach and Nightmare Before Christmas. And, Lucasfilm was up there too, the Star Wars guys. So you had this talent pool to draw from, really great people. And it was fun, yeah.
Now, for the animations, they're similar to your other work. They're a mix of stop motion, live action, and puppetry as well. What was the most, because of this mix, what was the most difficult part of producing the show and maybe was the best part of it?
It's the most difficult part of filming. Well, it was also the most exciting part, was the idea that we had to break down all of these scripts, and there's no game plan. You have to figure it out as you go along. So because of all of this idea of breaking down what's live action, what's puppetry, what's stop motion, we'd have big production meetings with all the key members of the team at the beginning of every season, going through every single shot and every single show, saying, okay, is this one going to be live action or not? And I did not want the audience to be, I wanted the design sense and the narrative to be strong enough that it carried everything through, even though you were editing live action shot next to stop motion shot. Loopy would often talk to a live action character or a puppet character, and everything had to match, lighting wise, and just atmosphere wise, So that was tricky. Pulling that off was, you had to constantly have the final image, the final product in mind as I was directing each individual shot. But it was also the fun of it all. That's what makes Loopy fun, I think.
Very cool. What was the best part of working on Loopy?
Every day was fun on Loopy. There was I think we were in San Francisco, so we didn't have the network were on the East Coast. So we were sort of far enough away that we had our own little world in this, and stop motion animation studios are fun places. It's like a little miniature Santa's workshop. Everyone's making little tiny props and working on these tiny, sets. It's like working on a movie, only everything's miniature. You've got real lights and real sets and all of that. And so we had a really great team. We had dress up days, stuff like that. And it was just, I think there was a feeling that this was a good, fun show. There was not, there's no working on Loopy. And I think that shows in the final episodes.
Was there any certain, I know for a lot of the shows on Kablam, some episodes had to be like approved by Nickelodeon. Were there any Loopy episode ideas that Nickelodeon didn't like, or was it mostly approved?
Right. It was, no, there was, we had a good relationship and most was approved. Honestly, I cannot remember. I've got them filed away somewhere. There were definitely, I would say, I submitted, maybe 6 out of every 10 episodes submitted was approved. So there was always a few that didn't make it. And I couldn't remember anything offhand. It's long enough ago now that I couldn't remember any of the ones that we didn't make it. But it was probably for good reasons. I don't think I ever, it was a good working relationship. I kind of, if they dropped one, I usually wasn't upset. It was sort of like, there was enough that we had, that was good. I didn't mind.
Interesting. Now, one that I've been itching to ask, there was live action bits in Loopy, and you played one of the characters in the live action bits. There were 2 characters called Turkey Thompson and Charlie Chicken. What was that like being in this cartoon universe?
It was really fun. When you're slugging away at animation, which takes days, and you're working frame by frame, doing these crazy little live action bits is fast and furious and silly, and it's a lot more fun. And being in the show was a real, it was a blast. It was fun. It was really funny. And, seeing yourself in your own show is a crazy feeling.
Hey there, welcome to Hanging with the Hangster. Say, you're kind of short for a celebrity, aren't you?
Cut it out, you canned cornballs. If this is quality television, then I'm a Brussels sprout.
Brussels sprout? Wait a second, let's see your mature viewer ID card, little lady.
Hey kids, Turkey Thompson here. Don't waste your time with goops and sprays. Do it the Charlie Chicken way.
Give yourself a cock-a-doodle-doo.
It's expert advice.
Larry!
I was quite a lot of characters, actually. I think the regular ones were Charlie Chicken and the other guy was Turkey Thompson, which was a guy named Kundo Rabordi, who was, most of the seasons it was Kundo, who now works for DreamWorks and is kind of an amazing production designer. But yeah, he was Turkey Thompson. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. I was other characters too, though, like the Fang Fairy. I was there's a German professor at one point. I mean, I'm probably about 15 different live action characters.
It's very cool. Do you have a favorite character that you in the live action segments that you performed as?
Um, Probably have to be Charlie Chicken. I mean, he's such a, I felt like Charlie Chicken should have his own show. That was just, it was ridiculous, jumping around in a chicken costume. But that was my favorite. In a Scottish accent too. I was doing a Scottish accent for some reason.
Brilliant. Now, after Loopy ended, you actually started work on another stop motion show in a similar style called Phantom Investigators. How did this show come to be, and how was it to transition from a kind of 4 to 5 minute short show to a 22-minute long production?
It was, I mean, when it happened, it was really exciting. It's when you're working away in the industry like that, to get a full show of your own is fantastic. So, and it did happen fairly soon after the end of Loopy did well. Kablam did well, and it was a 4-year run. So we were pitching shows, and Warner Brothers. We pitched it to Warner Brothers, and they said yes. And they partnered up with Sony to help finance it. And it was a challenge to sort of, suddenly that's a lot of television you're making. The equipment, especially stop motion, is not the easiest thing to make. So we did have to ramp up. We had a much bigger crew, a longer shooting schedule. We had a lot of stages, like at least 20 stages going. All for a year, all at once in this big warehouse where we were shooting, and I and my wife Josephine, who we co-directed this, just had to be on top of everything every day, 20 different stages going. So it was a much bigger operation. Having said that, it was still the same. We were used to that technique. We were able to sort of hone it in a little bit and make it a little slicker than the Loopy stuff, but it was exactly the same technique as Loopy, so we were used to doing that. Yeah, it was exciting.
That's very cool. For Loopy and Phantom Investigators, how were the stop motion puppets constructed for the show?
We had same for both really. We had either a wire frame or a ball and socket joint armature, depending on the puppet. If we were Loopy had ball and socket armatures, which are more expensive to make, but are they're tougher. They can put up with a lot more bending around by the animators. So there was this, the underlying skeleton, if you like, was made of metal, and they call them ball and socket, or you can make them out of wire. But so we had a little bit of both in the shows. And then on top of that, with Loopy, she just had basically her fabric costume on top of that, 3-dimensional. When it came to, and then other puppets, other characters would have foam. We created. They were originally clay sculpts, and you make a mold from the clay sculpt, and then you make foam, and then that's one technique. So there were different techniques, but all the bodies, legs, and all of that stuff were 3-dimensional. When it came to the heads, they were flat, and that was another. I don't think many people had done that before. It was a weird technique, but the heads were made of wood cut out with a jigsaw, and then there was a metal plate on top of that. Also cut out to the same shape. That was painted with the actual design of the face, and then the features. In order to animate these things, it was tiny little flat magnets, almost like fridge magnets, that we had printed onto paper thin magnetic material. So, and then cut out, and then the animators would have to, with tweezers, put on the different mouths, different eyelids, different all of this stuff. That's how we did it. There was no computer stuff involved in it at all, as far as the animation went.
Now, how was it editing the final? Now, I'm not sure if you would be on editing, but how long would it usually take for editing, animation, and filming for an entire episode of either Loopy or Phantom Investigators? Obviously, Phantom Investigators would take much longer, but
yeah. Well, if you think of, I mean, it's spread the way we, it's all about the budget. You have to figure out. We could not shoot episode by episode. We had to break down both with Loopy and Phantom Investigators. You have to break down the entire season into shots. Like, in a whole season, how many shots are shot in Loopy's bedroom, and how many shots are shot from the same angle in Loopy's bedroom with the same wall behind her. So that's really a ton of work. That's all about the storyboarding, and the production end of things is time consuming and painful. But that's the way to shoot it as cheap as possible, because if you try and keep constantly moving the camera, constantly, like breaking sets down and putting sets up again and breaking them down again and putting them up again, it'll make your life much harder and costs much more money as well and takes much time up. So that's how we did it. So every season was shot, like I say, one section by section. As far as the entire, like a Loopy season would have probably taken nearly a year, but that includes writing, which takes months, and that's cheap. So you just, you're hanging out at home, sending scripts to Nickelodeon back and forth until everyone's happy with them. Then the actual shooting of a Loopy season, probably 3 months, something like that, with the whole team, everyone up and running. And then the rest of the year would be music, sound effects, post-production, editing, which again, suddenly you're downsizing again to a small, tiny team working with the composer, working with all of that stuff. So, but about like one season of Loopy, all of that together, about a year. And then Phantom Investigators, because it was a much bigger crew, we shot everything in about a year for the whole season. And I think there were 12 episodes or 13 episodes altogether.
13.
Yeah. And they were 22-minute episodes, so a huge amount of much more work. But the whole thing was shot in a year, but then, it took months and months to write, and then quite a lot of time to do all the post afterwards as well.
Right. Now, do you have a favorite episode of either Life with Loopy or Phantom Investigators?
It's tricky. I'm really like both. I think Loopy, if I show anyone one episode, I Good Food Gone Bad. Do you know that one? Yes, yeah, with the boys from the dairy. We're mean and we're scary.
Pipe down and listen, sister.
Listen to you? Why should I? You look like a bad egg.
That's right, sister. Bad to the yolk. But I know where your friend is. He's a good kid, but he's fallen in with the wrong company. He's hanging out with the dairy boys.
Wait, what's going on? Who are the...
Sorry, Toots. That's all I can tell you. Gotta scramble.
We're the boys from the dairy. We're mean and we're scary. We're boys from the dairy. We're made of bad stuff. Don't drink us, don't pour us, don't dare try to boil us, 'cause we're from the dairy and we'll mess you up.
And Phantom Investigators, boy. I like the frat house one with the pizza demon. What was it? Yeah, hard to say. That one I like. It's so bizarre. There's a lot of bizarre. Oh, you know what? I like the haunted film. Do you know the Phantom Investigators episode with Morgue, and it's a sort of a haunted print of an old sci-fi movie.
Oh yeah, Ghosts on Film.
Ghosts on Film. That's it. I like that one.
Now, besides these two productions, what else have you been working on, stop motion wise or film wise?
Let's see. I did the most recent major project was another series of shorts, all stop motion and a bit of mix for Disney Junior, called The Bite-Sized Adventures of Sam Sandwich, which is, you can see on there, they have a YouTube site, Disney Junior site, and all those episodes are on YouTube, and they aired for quite a while. Pretty proud of those. They were good. That was made about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe something like that. Let's see what else. I've made lots of little. I did a little short stop motion, really beautiful thing for a Japanese company, and it was a character called Black Rock Shooter, which was done for the Japanese market, like an anime character, but done in stop motion. I did a little special for Disney called Dudley and Nesta Do Nothing, about 2 kids who really don't, do anything. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of little things that you've hit the main ones. I mean, a lot of the work I do is also, I've got a whole history of performance art, doing wild live shows around the world. And I've also, these days, I'm mostly a painter, selling my artwork and exhibiting, having exhibitions of my painted work, which really is what, sort of sparked off all the animation to begin with. All the look of Loopy all comes from my paintings. So these days I I show them around the world. That's what I do, yeah, and teach as well. I've taught stop motion animation at CalArts. I teach sometimes at an amazing school in Los Angeles called the Renaissance Arts Academy.
For your art, I've seen a few of them, but for our listeners, how would you describe them?
They are slightly psychedelic, mystical nature paintings. The older I get, the more I want to paint nature. And they're very colorful, like Loopy was. I don't use black paint. I use just color, and but they're figurative. They're cartoony, but they involve mythology, children, animals, and sort of a mystical approach to nature as well. So they're Loopy-esque, and some of them are very Loopy-esque. Some of them are also based on my live shows. I do these wild live shows with costumes and all sorts of stuff. So I've constantly loved taking these same ideas but bouncing them around in different media, like whether it's live or animation or painting. So yeah, if that describes it at all, that's hopefully.
Yeah, I'd say that works.
If people want to see the work, I have an artist website, which is what is it? It's StephenHolmanArt.com. So that's StephenHolmanArt.com.
And my last question for you is, a lot of Nickelodeon older shows have been announced that they're working on reboots. There's been no announcement of a Kablam reboot, but if there was one, would we possibly see you working? Would you see yourself working on a new version of Loopy, or is that in the past for you?
No, I would go back to Loopy. Not everything I've done, I think, but Loopy is my favorite show I've done. I think just the spirit and the liveliness, and I still think the world needs more girl characters. Like really, spunky, charismatic, proactive girl characters, not sort of princess ones, but ones that actually have a bit of spark to them. And that really still, I think, is a good thing to be doing. And if those guys want us to make more Loopies, yes, I'd do that.
Well, hopefully that does happen.
Yeah, I hope so too. That would be fun. Yeah, I know a lot of the other Nickelodeon shows are doing quite well again, I think, aren't they? So hopefully Kablam will have a second day. Yeah.
I hope at least it gets released on DVD one day. I've been waiting for that for a long time.
Yeah, me too. I know.
Well, I want to thank you for the interview, for this wonderful insight into Life with Loopy and your other productions. Very interesting, and thank you for coming on.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
No problem at all.